Adoption sucks, actually. I speak as a former adoptee who fully realized that I was never actually legally adopted as an adult in college. I speak as a former adoptee who lived in a home where adoption was used to hide abuse. I speak as a former adoptee who was silenced and told my pain and trauma were good for me, actually. Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and you're watching That Liz Hunter, the channel where everyone thinks my name is Liz, and nobody knows what my next video will be about. And I certainly don't know what my next video will be about either. But if you can't tell from this intro and from the title, this video is about adoption. And I'm actually using a mic, so sorry if the audio is a little bit weird. I rarely use a mic because I have to hold it and I have ADHD and cannot keep my hands still. So good luck to me and good luck to you. Our culture loves adoption, and there is plenty of media to prove that. I'm just gonna mention a couple of examples. Orphan Annie and Daddy Warbanks. Whether it's the classic Orphan Annie musical or the classic movie, I think there's a classic movie, or the modern remake. I've seen the musical and I've seen the remake. Whatever media you're watching Orphan Annie on, Daddy Warbanks is a weird character name and it deserves to be canceled, especially when you're watching high schoolers perform it and the man playing Daddy Warbanks is picking up a 15-year-old. That's just weird. This Is Us. I cannot get over the adoption story in This Is Us because it made me cry. And whether it made you cry or not, it's a weird show because it was made after Donald Trump was elected and it made me cry every single episode, and adoption was a huge part of the story. The Blind Side. This is actually the movie, the story that inspired this current video that you're watching. And we will get into it later on in this video because there's been a lot of news about it lately and it deserves to be fully fleshed out. And I'm not sure if this video fully fleshes it out in the way that it deserves, but we're going to talk about The Blind Side later on. So sit back, don't relax, because we're going to get mad together at the adoption industry. Adoption is supposed to be a beautiful story. A child is in desperate need of parental love, so a messy but capable family steps in to save the day, and the rest is happily ever after. But so often, it is not happily ever after, because life is not a Disney movie. It's not any sort of movie. It might be a soap opera instead. So whether adoption, the story, is faked, sugar-coated, or rewritten, adoption is actually real, it's painful, it's trauma, and the stories that our culture tells rarely center the lives of the children impacted by adoption. So let's talk about that today. Let's talk about some of the problems with adoption and the lives that are most impacted by it, and why our culture overlooks the actual children that are affected by adoption in favor of some glorified saviorism story that centers the adopted parents over the adopted kids. Now, I do want to offer a disclaimer here. This video centers the experience of adoption in America because I'm American, if you can't tell. And that is the experience I am most familiar with, and I feel like international adoption is a story for another day. It is massive, it needs covered, but it will not be happening in this video. Illegal adoptions. We're going to talk about specifically rehoming because that is something I experience and it's something thousands of children experience every year. What is rehoming? It is the practice of adopting children and then sending them back to the adoption agency or another family, or using sites like Facebook to find them a new family where they are supposedly wanted because the original family that adopted them no longer wants them. This is a story from Reuters. Todd and Melissa Puchala struggled for more than 2 years to raise Kita, the troubled teenager they adopted from Liberia. When they decided to give her up, they found new parents to take her in less than 2 days by posting an ad to the internet. Nicole and Kevin Eason, an Illinois couple in their 30s, saw the ad and a picture of the smiling teenager. They were eager to take Kita, even though the ad warned that she had been diagnosed with severe health and behavioral problems. In emails, Nicole Eason assured Melissa that she could handle the child. A few weeks later, the Puchalas drove 6 hours from their Wisconsin home to Westville, Illinois. The handoff took place at the County Air Mobile Home Park, where the Easons lived in a trailer. No attorneys or child welfare officers came with them. The Puchalas simply signed a notarized statement declaring these virtual strangers to be Kita's guardians. The visit lasted just a few hours. It was the first and last time the couples would meet. The teenager had been tossed into America's underground market for adopted children, a loose internet network where desperate parents seek new homes for kids they regret adopting. So rehoming has a pretty big reputation among international adoptions. I was rehomed as a domestic adoption. Reuters investigated in 2013 and found that at least once a week adoptive parents would post on internet message boards on Yahoo advertising a child they said needed a rehome. we needed rehoming. This was in 2013. I can only imagine how much worse it's gotten. I was rehomed before the dawn of internet message boards. I was not internationally adopted, but a child shuffled between relatives' homes in the U.S. foster care system. When my foster mother did not want me, she told people at her church and her community. In fact, she would tell anyone who would listen, which seems really weird, but it was 2003 and Facebook did not exist. Eventually, my adoptive parents heard about a little girl who needed a home, and they offered their place as a choice. Let's see if I can talk. My foster mother drove me to Dallas, signed over some paperwork, and voila, I was in a new home. There was no welfare check, there was no follow-up visit, there was no CPS. I was a nameless child who was rehomed, and the system easily forgot about. From Reuters, giving away a child in America is actually surprisingly easy. Legal adoptions must be handled through the courts, and prospective parents must be vetted. But there are ways around such processes. Children can be sent to new families quickly through a basic power of attorney document, a notarized statement declaring the child to be in the care of another adult. Sometimes a child might be removed from a home when it is discovered that they are rehomed, but seldom are parents punished for rehoming. No state, federal, or international laws even acknowledge that rehoming is a practice that exists. It is not illegal to rehome your children. And I realized that I was fully rehomed when I was in college and looking for paperwork to prove that I was in foster care, and my parents gave me the power of attorney documents to show for the FAFSA. When my sister tried to enroll in high school, she was not able to enroll in high school because power of attorney is supposed to be a short-term paperwork thing apparently, and the state where she was living did not acknowledge it, and my parents did not have the legal authority to sign her over to go to high school. So she was not able to enroll in high school because we couldn't even figure out who was the actual legal guardian in this situation. So yeah, rehoming sucks. And most of the time, if you're a child like me, when you were 9 or 10 and it happened, you don't realize till you're adult. I was 23 when I fully realized, hey, I was never legally adopted. There's no one in the world who had legal guardianship over me. And if they are alive, I don't know about them, because the person who last had legal guardianship of me, that we can trace back the legal paperwork, died when I was 16. So we don't know who was supposed to be my legal guardian when my sister tried to enroll in high school and when I was in college and filling out FAFSA paperwork. Technically, we don't think we even had a legal guardian. We were just lost in the system, and there was no follow-up, no paperwork, nothing done to ensure that we were being properly taken care of in the home in which we were given away to. So rehoming is a big thing that happens in the US, and there is no real legal recourse for children who are rehomed. There's no follow-up, and it seems to be an under-the-radar practice that happens in all 50 states. And children are the ones most impacted, and therefore the legal system seems to ignore us because children are not seem to be the focus of the legal system. There are parts of adoption that are legal, and that's foster care. Foster care is not technically adoption, but it is a huge avenue that people use to get children in their homes. Children in need of homes in the US have a history of being victims of capitalism. And I think foster care has its roots deeply invested in capitalism. When I was a kid, I read about the orphan train. It was the first movement in the United States to place unhoused orphans in the Northeast in homes around the country. Hundreds of orphans were taken by train out of New York State and taken out west, where they were given away to families. Many of these families seldom had background checks done before adoption. Once these children were adopted, they were expected to serve as extra help around the farms, in exchange for the adoptive parents to raise them as their own. From 1855 to 1875, an average of 3,000 children were adopted via the orphan train network. Many children were used as labor on farms, while others were adopted by loving families.
The Children's Aid Society had the children line up by height at a train platform or at a city hall or a Grange hall. Then farmers or whoever came would often, not unlike a slave auction, have them run in place, check their teeth, check their muscles, have them do even sit-ups or push-ups to make sure they were strong because they wanted workers. The farmers would take them off the stage and then fill out certificates taking ownership of the child.
Critics of the system railed against the weak background checks as well as the lack of support that was provided for the children after they were adopted. They were lost in the system once the adoption went through. And as long as the children could work, families wanted them. We see this story echoed in Anne of Green Gables. Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert need help on their farm, so they ask a family friend to bring back an orphan boy from the orphanage. Instead, they get a precocious redheaded child. Girls aren't the help that the Cuthberts need on their Prince Edward Island farm. Despite that, Matthew grows fond of the child and Marilla gives in to the idea of raising the preteen. The story subverts the cultural attitude towards orphan children, that they were useful only when they could work. Useful as babies when they could replace a lost infant, easily discarded once they were a child. Useful as labor when a family needed an extra hand on the farm, easily discarded when they themselves became work for their parents. Anne Shirley is not useful. She is loud and takes up space and demands attention. She is the opposite of a docile orphan, the perfect child who can fit in and complete a family, a story that is constantly told and rehashed in media throughout American history. Anne is traumatized. She is proud of her own identity, and she is an adoptee who chooses her newfound family as much as they choose her. Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert never really adopt Anne. She just chooses to live there, and they choose to accept her as part of their family. I have always loved that story. It is an adoption story that plays against the cultural neglect of children as objects of use, that frames adoption from the perspective of a child rather than the perspective of the family. Matthew and Marilla are not heroes. Adoption is messy and complicated, and the Cuthberts are painfully ignorant of the cost of adoption. In fact, they make multiple mistakes throughout the book series that is highlighted and that they then choose to write rather than ignore. At the same time, Matthew and Marilla choose to do more than their mistakes. They choose to do right. The community that Anne finds becomes the family she has never known. Her adoption story is a community story. It is a story of a community that chooses to bring Anne into their family. In that way, Anne's sense of family and belonging is romanticized more than the actual practice of adoption. And that is what adoption is. In my mind, it is not just 2 or 3 individuals saying, hey, we're going to take this child. It is a whole community that says, hey, we need to come alongside them, support them, and welcome this child into our whole family. Because an individual family without community support fails at adoption. And that is a story we see time and time again. Today, the majority of children who need adoption in the U.S. who are in need of families are in foster care. And foster care has a brutal impact on the lives it involves. In 2021, nearly 20,000 children, or 9% of children in foster care, aged out of the system. A majority left without the emotional and financial support necessary to succeed in life that other children get because they are in families. And you don't often think about these support systems if you grew up with them. You just take them for granted. Without these vital supports, children will fare poorly as a group in post-secondary educational attainment, employment, stability in housing, public assistance, and criminal justice. 70% of children in foster care say they want to go to college, yet nearly 25% of children in foster care will age out of the system without a high school diploma or GED. Only 6% will finish a 2-year degree. It is really hard to go to college when you age out of foster care, because when you think about in college, what do you need? You need a family to return to while on break. You need a family who can give you monetary support while you're in class. You need a family who can take you to class, take you and drop you off for the semester and help you out. You need that emotional and financial support. Children in foster care who age out of the system do not receive that, and therefore college is almost impossible to attain on your own. There are thousands of Anne Shirleys in the foster care system. Children who don't need a new mom or dad, but they do need a community. Children who need unconditional support and people to ground them. They don't necessarily need to replace their family, they just need community. And being community for a child is selfless work. It's hard and it's overlooked. I think it's overlooked in our culture because it is not sexy, it's not easy, it's not commercialized, and it's not simple. We want to replace a child's family. But that is not what foster care is for. That is not what Anne Shirley needed. She never calls Matthew and Marilla mom or dad because they don't replace her mom and dad. They become a new sense of community for her, and they ground her and enable her to succeed in life where the orphanage where she was living could never have done that. That's what foster care should be for children. But our culture doesn't value that. Our culture values the commercialization of adoption and the romanticization of adoption that becoming community for a foster child does not give. So let's talk about the commercialization of adoption. Part of the allure of rehoming that I mentioned earlier is that it is a lot cheaper than adopting a child. And it avoids the foster care system altogether. The foster care system overall is not supposed to replace families. The foster care system, its goal is the reunification of a child with its parents. And if you can't reunify, then staying in the system permanently will happen. But it's not supposed to replace a mom and dad. A lot of people want to replace a child's mom and dad, and that is why commercial adoption and rehoming has appeal. Adopting from a foreign country costs tens of thousands of dollars. Taking custody through rehoming pretty much costs nothing. In fact, taking a child may enable the new family to claim a tax deduction and even draw government benefits from that. Of the nearly 4 million children who are born each year, only about 18,000 are voluntarily relinquished for adoption. Though the statistics are unreliable, some estimates suggest that dozens of couples are now waiting to adopt each available baby. Since the mid-70s, or the 1970s, the end of so-called baby scoop era, when large numbers of unmarried women placed their children up for adoption, the percentage of never married women who relinquish their children have declined from 9% to less than 1%. More than 100,000 children are available for adoption via foster care, but adoptive parents tend to prefer those who are what the adoptive world calls AYAP, as young as possible. The result is often a difficult, expensive process for couples who want to adopt a baby or a toddler. Adopting a newborn can cost up to $45,000, but actually probably more. A cottage industry of adoption facilitators has sprung up that may charge $25,000, which is like an advertising fee for a family in order to find a birth mom. And when I speak of commercialization, I not only speak of the cost. Adoption is romanticized and used as a story to commercialize our cultural need to disregard children. Adoption feeds into the white saviorism of America. The Blind Side is the perfect example of this. And to be clear, I've actually never seen the movie. I grew up in a home that really didn't watch television and movies, and The Blind Side came out before we were watching popular peripherally Christian movies, because I think of The Blind Side as a Christian movie, even though it's not like apparently Christian. I thought it was like a Christian movie, but I didn't realize it was like Sandra Bullock won an Oscar for it. I had no idea until recently. But I never watched it, so I'm only speaking of what I've read literally on the Wikipedia page and what I've gathered from other people about the movie. The movie tells the story of a white teacher who sees a struggling black student and decides to help. Her family offers this black teenager a home and a new family, and it just so happens that this teenager is a football superstar, and he ends up playing at Ole Miss and in the NFL. But there are some major problems with this narrative. First, the adoption that plays a central role in the story, it wasn't adoption at all. It turns out it was a conservatorship. And while the legal back and forth over that conservatorship and what it means plays out, there is a significant emotional difference between adopting a child and simply providing a guardianship or conservatorship. And most importantly, if you make a movie about it, don't pretend that you adopted someone when you simply provided a conservatorship that allowed them to play football at your alma mater. Because if you're going to use an adopted person's story as the center of a movie, you better make sure they're okay with telling that story. Also, this makes me furious. The child at the center of the movie was mischaracterized. He was portrayed as intellectually delayed, which had a real-life impact on his career in how people treated him. This further romanticizes the white people in the story as heroes, as white saviors, for taking a chance on an intellectually delayed child. The Blind Side portrays adoption as a feel-good story. It centers the adoptive parents and their choice to adopt as the central narrative. In the process, a real-life person's trauma and life was twisted and used for someone else's Hollywood glory. There are few things more disgusting to me than that. And to further compound this, whenever an adopted child speaks on their experience and how their story is romanticized and how that harms them, they are told to be quiet. As an adoptee, I have run into this narrative countless times. We are told to let the romanticization exist, that speaking on our pain harms our adoptive parents. We're told, well, your adoptive parents sacrificed so much, be grateful. Because our culture is obsessed with the cost of adoption for those interested in adopting children, it provides more grace for abuse and harm. Because it costs adoptive families so much to get a child, that child becomes little more than a product in their story. That child's experience matters little compared to the cost to the parents. For that child to later speak on the harm done to them, it is seen as ungrateful, manipulative, and whiny, because their real life matters little compared to the cost to the parents, because they are a victim of capitalism. So yes, adoption sucks. It is an exploitative market that overlooks harm to children in favor of whitewashed fairy tales of found family and healed trauma, when very often there is no found family and there is no healed trauma. There are good adoption stories. This video today is not here to praise the good apples in a rotten system. If that makes you uncomfortable, I hope you can ask yourself why you would rather I defend a few good apples when the roots of a tree are actively poisoning thousands of children. Thanks for watching. I have included links to sources that I cite in the description. If this video is helpful or informative to you in any way, please consider subscribing to my channel or leaving a comment. And I do have a Patreon where you can join my kindred spirits. Yes, that is an Anne of Green Gables reference, because I'm a redhead and Anne is my twin. And I deserve to reference the story that shaped my childhood as much as I possibly want to. So thanks for watching, and I'm sorry this video was not more lighthearted. It was a really incredibly difficult video to write and think about. And I will see you next time for a video I have no idea what will be about, but I hope it's good, and I hope it's on a little lighter topic. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want, and I will work to clarify any concerns in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all later. See ya!
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.